And it's been a fascinating role. And one of the first things they asked me to do was to look at behaviour training. How do we train teachers in behaviour management? Now, behaviour management is an odd term. It's got a lot of baggage associated with it. So I sometimes say running a room. I think that's a much nicer way to understand it. How do you run the room to create ends that you want to achieve? Because when you say behaviour management, I mean, in English, this often has very negative associations with, holding children down and, sending them out and shouting at them and so on. Can I just quickly ask a second sample here? Put your hand up if you are a current teacher or are a teacher in general. You see, there's the sample. Most of you are teachers here. Have you come to this session looking for ideas on how to improve behaviour in your classroom? Put your hand up if you have. Oh, 3. Okay, right, fine. I'll do my best to cover both bases then. A proposition for you. I'm going to suggest that definitely in the UK, and I think in lots and lots of territories, we still haven't got it right when it comes to how we train teachers to be ready for a classroom. To be ready for that plurality and diversity of personalities and visions and cultures which inhabit a room. Now, one of the nice things about adults is that you often see very high levels of self-regulation. Look at you all now. Nobody is shouting or swearing. Some people are on their phones, but I can't confiscate them. It's very frustrating. And the annoying thing about conferences now is that you never know if they're live tweeting what you're saying or just checking what's for dinner. So it's difficult. In schools you have less of an option. But anyway, when I looked at initial teacher training in the UK, what I found was something which echoed my experience to some extent, which was that very frequently teachers were given a very short lecture on behaviour. My own personal training in behaviour management was 45 minutes. 45 minutes to learn how to do one of the most central things in my job, which is how to direct the behaviour of children towards goals which help them to flourish as individuals and as a community. That's very, very hard. I used to work as a nightclub manager, as I said before. Bouncers are given more training on how to run a nightclub than teachers are given on how to run a room. And what we discovered through looking at different schools and different systems was that often one of the messages you would get from ITT, initial teacher training, was that effective pedagogy, i.e. very good forms of instruction, how you teach children, would solve most of the behaviour issues. Rubbish. For emphasis, rubbish. I cannot emphasise that enough. It massively helps, of course it does. But if a child does not wish to listen to you, if a child is not in the mood, if the child has had an argument with their parent, if a child has had an argument with their friends on Facebook, then all of your best intentions will be dashed against the cliffs of their indifference if they just don't care at that moment. And I worked in a lot of tough schools as a teacher, and I spent years asking myself, is it me? What am I doing wrong? What am I doing wrong? Until I realised after maybe 3, 4 years, I was probably doing things wrong, but nobody had shown me how to do things better. So, for 6 months we looked at different initial teacher training systems, and we worked out ways in which teachers could run their classrooms better. And one of our key findings was that the biggest effect and influence on the behaviour in a school was the leadership of the school, how the school was run. Now this may sound somewhat obvious, but sometimes obvious things need to be said in order to be understood, challenged, and looked at from different angles. So I wrote a second report for the government. It was called Creating a Culture. It was published last year. And the good news is it's free, it's online as a PDF. In fact, it was illustrated by Oliver Caviglioli, who is one of our speakers today. Because I wanted it to be something that was accessible, that could be shared easily, and that schools could actually look at. And as a teacher of 15 years myself, I wanted it to be something that was pitched at a level that practitioners could appreciate. Most teachers don't read journals. Most of them don't. Most of them don't have time. Most of them aren't trained to read research. I'm not saying that's a problem with the system. It's just a feature of the system. Teachers are busy. Most of you appear to be teachers. I bet you've got loads of free time, right? I bet you've got nothing but free time in your lives. You teach a lesson a day, and then you just relax. And you smoke cigarettes, eat licorice. So, in order to try and get as much information as this as possible, I didn't want to write a report which was just, here's what I think, because I already think and have strong opinions on this. But I wanted to look at what the best leaders did to help students and teachers to flourish. So we took a variety of methods for this. We interviewed, gosh, I think about 100 head teachers. And we took submissions from about another 100. We visited scores and scores of schools that were exemplary. We read the literature, we interviewed academics, we had round tables of head teachers, and we also commissioned some research at the side to do what we were doing at the same time, but separately from us, to see if people were telling us different things than to them. Because I wanted to make sure that I wasn't just picking people that agreed with me, because that would defeat the purpose. Now, obviously, I'm still the lens of this report. I think it's very important when you're talking about evidence that you admit where you are. This is not physics. You know, these are case studies interpreted through the lens of my experience, which I regard as being a professional document. At the same time, there's no scientific certainty about anything I say. But as I say, I think certainty is sometimes overrated. I think we're looking for probability. We're looking for best bets. And we made sure that we looked at schools in England that were doing very well, but had very challenging circumstances. There is very little point, I'm going to suggest, going to schools where the behaviour is immaculate and the children are all just, you know, the sons and daughters of diplomats, and so on. That's not to say you can't learn anything in these circumstances, of course you can. But I wanted to know, what were the best schools doing when circumstances were difficult to make things good? And so we looked at schools in cities, in the country, we looked at schools on the coast. I don't know if you have the same issues here, but coastal schools in the UK traditionally have lots and lots of issues, normally because they're quite isolated. We looked at junior schools, we looked at more senior schools, we looked at what we call alternative provision for children who've been removed from school, children with extreme, what do you call that here? Thank you, I remember that. I'll try and use that phrase. Because we wanted to find out. Because of course we all know that children who come from traditionally more affluent backgrounds typically, and I mean typically, not always, but typically have a lot more social capital, if that makes sense. You know, they know a lot more about the world, they've been exposed to more a greater variety of cultural experiences, they tend to have a broader vocabulary, they tend to have been exposed to, quite literally, millions more words. I mean in quantity, not the vocabulary itself. So children who come from socio-economic and advantaged backgrounds tend to be more advantaged at schools. We know this. Obviously it's not certain because there are exceptions and it's a curve of some kind. So we wanted to go to different schools, and we did. And we found out quite a lot. We found out that there is a problem. That whenever you ask, this is the extraordinary thing, I wonder if it's the same thing here. Whenever you ask institutions, municipal authorities, external inspections, things look quite good. Behaviour appears to be reasonably good. But when you ask teachers, when you're actually serving people in the classroom and you do it anonymously, they very frequently say, no, there are problems. And the dislocation between these two sectors is enormous. And in the UK, we found that head teachers and local authorities, and maybe you've heard of Ofsted, we have an inspectorate called Ofsted, they were saying 75% of schools are good or better when it comes to behaviour. Every time I went to a school, I found lots and lots and lots of problems for behaviour. And I often found frequently that not only were there some schools where the behaviour was very bad overall, but even when you went to a school with reasonably good behaviour, you would find lots of pockets of poor behaviour. I call it my two schools theory. That there is one school. If you are senior, if you are high status, if you only teach a few lessons a day or less, if you've been there for years, then sometimes children might behave very, very well for you. Whereas if you are low status, and I mean that ironically, sarcastically, if you only work a few days a week, if you're part-time, if you are a cover teacher, a supply teacher, a temporary teacher, you might experience a very different school in the same school. And that's why I call it my two schools theory. Every culture has subcultures. Now, again, I mentioned this in my opening speech. Dylan William, whom some of you I'm sure will know very well, and he works with researchers very often, he said, nothing works everywhere and everything works somewhere. He said this at Washington Research Inn, and it really stuck with me. It is impossible to make any kind of strategy advice and say, yes, this will work with every child. This will work with every school. And therefore it's fruitless to try to do so. But what we can do, because teaching is also a craft, as well as a science and maybe possibly an art, what we can do is try to do things which impact as many people as possible, the best bet strategies and so on. And I think that 95% of children in those schools can probably be taken very, very far with some of the strategies we came up with. And the other 5% need a much more, shall we say, boutique provision. But we know this. You know, special children need special attention. All children are special in their own way, in that respect. And here's what we found. We found that there were some themes that were universal to all the schools that were very effective. That all the school leaders who were running schools tended to do not exactly the same thing, but they approached the same topic, shall we say. But they did so in a way that was very specific to their school, to their circumstances, which is why I call it universal language in a local dialect. I mean, some of the things which I recommend all school leaders look at, and all classroom teachers I might add, you could probably guess in about 3 seconds. You know, teachers and school leaders who are consistent tend to have a far higher impact on their students' behaviour in terms of their instructions, their directions, and so on. You know, big deal. You could have told me that. Teachers who have high expectations of children, school leaders who have high expectations of staff and children, tend to have a bigger impact on the behaviour. Big deal. You could have told me that too. But what was very interesting for me was lots of things were. Number one was everybody I spoke to, good or bad, thought that they were consistent and had high expectations. Everybody thought that. It's a bit like when I do a lot of training with teachers, and I frequently say to teachers, describe your teaching style. And without even looking at what they've written, I can predict that 90% of them will write, I'm tough, but I'm fair. Right? Yeah, sometimes I just say that. Put your hand up if you said tough or fair, they all gasp, as if it's something new. We all think we're tough but fair. We all think we're a bit strict but quite likeable. You know? We can't all be. We're certainly not all on the same continuum. So, that's one thing to take away from that. Yeah, sorry, I beg your pardon. Let me move to the second point, which was that the interpretation of these themes was contextual. Some schools have children walking up the left-hand side of the corridor. Do any of you do that in your schools? Yeah. And some schools, they do it on the right-hand side. It's like traffic. This is particularly in high-volume schools. So do none of you have a side of the corridor your children walk on? My God, your children must be so good. Oh, you do, thank God. I thought it was just British children that were animals running through corridors, hitting each other. Now, some schools do the left, some schools do the right, some schools don't do it at all. I don't care. Do your schools have uniforms? Lots of shaking, some nodding. Okay, I don't care. Some schools do uniform brilliantly. Some schools don't use uniform and still do brilliantly. It doesn't matter to me. What matters is what you're implementing effective in the school in which you are. And there are lots of different ways to get to the same result. And that was quite refreshing. You know, primary schools achieve good behaviour in a slightly different way than the more senior schools will. Older children react slightly differently to younger children. We know this. There are lots of different contexts that we need to be aware of. And what we came to, we found some common features of all these schools. I won't go through it with you all. You're more than welcome to look at the report if you want. But we saw that these are things that, which again, you could have probably come up with yourself. That very effective leaders, where the behaviour was great, were very visible, had very clear expectations. And again, that's another thing. Everybody we spoke to said, yes, I have clear expectations. But we can't all have clear expectations. I go into a lot of schools. We ask the staff, what does the school value? What's the school mission? What are you all trying to achieve together? And they can't tell me. I go to some schools where they can't tell me the name of the head teacher. And sometimes in these schools, I don't know if maybe this is one of your schools, sometimes I say to them, what's the name of the head teacher? And they tell me a name, and it's actually the lady on reception. Because they think she's the head. I mean, that's terrifying. When you've got such low expectations and low clarity. And there's loads of other things. I mean, attention to detail, engaging the staff, very consistent, caring about all the students, and supporting all the staff. Wow. Where do I sign up for my money? For writing this? And I thought about it, and I realized that what unified all those concepts was this: leaders must be the conscious architects of the school culture. The school culture. This is no mean feat. Leaders have to create a society. I may add, incidentally, I do a lot of training with teachers. I've been doing it all week this week. Teachers also have to do this too in their classrooms. You make the weather in your classroom. And if you don't want to make the weather, if you don't want to consciously become the architect, fine. But the weather will still be there. The architecture will still be there. The wind will still blow. Whether you wear a heavy jacket or a swimsuit, the wind will still blow. So I called my report Creating a Culture, because that was the simplest way I could express it. And the three sections of that are fairly obviously that one has to design the culture that we need. You have to say to yourself, what do I want to happen in this school? Is that obvious? Yes. Do we do it? Not very clearly. Typically, as teachers and leaders, we tend to react to misbehaviour. Or we come up with some things we think would be nice for them to do. But very infrequently do we think, what are the values of the school? What would that look like in the dinner queue? What would that look like in the classroom? What does that look like in the playground? What does that look like on a school trip? What would people actually be doing? And translating those values into concrete behaviour was the first step. Was consciously deciding, what do I think good behaviour looks like in this school? And leaders and teachers should decide that for themselves. Different schools have different standards and different cultures. Fine. I embrace plurality. I love a system which is diverse. I think that's healthy. I think some things should be consistent across the system, high expectations and so on. But the way in which you implement that should be specific and local to the culture of the school, and that's fine. And by culture, I mean just very simply, the values and beliefs shared by a group. There's a culture everywhere you go, whether you want to create it or not. Again, it's like weather. There's a culture in this room, and it's a lovely one. You're all beautiful, thank you. I'm just trying to get you not to walk out. And behaviour is simply the actions that express those values and beliefs. So behaviour is intrinsic to culture. Now, why don't students like school? That sounds like a very, very negative question, but you know what? Often they don't. Why do children misbehave? What's behind their negativity at times? And there's lots of answers. Well, for a start, and the most obvious answer is, we ask them to do things that they may not be inclined to do, naturally. I don't know many 12-year-olds that really, really want to sit down on Friday and do trigonometry. You're all probably thinking, what? That's because we are a nerd subgroup. But most people don't want on a Saturday morning, for example, to be sitting talking about education. And they'd have to be forced to do so, which is why I have these events on a Saturday, incidentally, because it's voluntary. Nobody dragged you here. Was anyone dragged here? Was anyone told to be here by the school or something? A couple of hands. Yes. Second thing is, we ask them to think. Thinking is hard. Thinking is hard. I don't mean passive thinking, I don't mean just observing and tuning out. I love using things like, PowerPoints and so on in my lessons, but I think we sometimes lost something when we started to use PowerPoints. Because a lot of kids just look at it and go, big television. Big television. I used to love using clips in my lessons. I still do it from time to time, but you know, I used to play whole films. Whole films to my classes. I'm such an idiot. That's what film club's for. But lessons are for learning, not for sitting there and turning off. I teach philosophy. I showed my class the film 300. Do you know the film 300? I was trying to show them Greek virtues, and then I just realised I was just showing them a film, like a treat. So thinking is hard though. Getting somebody to actually think about something is very, very difficult. I mean, what's 22 divided by 7? Anyone? Any mathematicians in the audience? 3.14, surely. Sure. Where were you? Where was that voice I needed to hear? You know, but thinking is hard. If you haven't done that, were some of you actually trying to work it out? Bless you. Bless you. Right. And they get judged. They get judged. Somebody makes a judgment on them all the time. And again, for a lot of kids, that's very uncomfortable, especially if you are below the par of what's expected of you. We ask them to focus. That's hard. A lot of you said you were on Twitter today. I love it, but I fear it at the same time. I'm not sure if I'm the slave or the master. Because I find it very hard to read something that's longer than 800 words now. And I find it harder to write something that's more than 280 characters. And I mean that. I find I haven't read a book now for 10 years now. That's because I have children. I haven't read a book for 4 years now because of them. Distractions are everywhere. Just being with your friends is distracting. Having a mobile phone on you is even worse. And finally, schools exist to teach us things we haven't evolved to learn easily. People like, gosh, who is it now? Louis Sweller talk about this, don't they? The idea that we've evolved to learn what I would call folk learning very, very easily. Children do it all the time. Children learn through play at a very early age, but they learn things like gravity. You know, they learn how to catch a ball. They learn that water can be hot or cold. You can drink it, but it chokes you. They learn all these things about the world. And it's very useful. But that method of learning only takes you so far. And if you want to learn what I'm going to call propositional content, propositional knowledge, you know, World War I started in 1914, and these are the reasons, and blah, blah, blah. That kind of learning is much harder and requires focus. And requires discipline and self-regulation. So we're asking children to do a lot of things which are hard, and things which might make them feel uncomfortable. It's no wonder that many children don't see school as being the place they want to be and behave like angels. Kids are just like us. They're not angels, they're not demons. They're just like us. And I don't know why we expect them to be better than us. Or worse. I'll move on from that. Now, we also know from social science. What? Is that what you want to do? Big picture. I'll play some music in the meantime. Your call is important to us. How long does it take? I'm only on for 40 minutes. When she smiles. Okay. So I can't start singing. What an idiot. I apologize. Right. We know from psychology that human beings are intensely sociable. Intensely sociable. Look at us all now, huddled together. For warmth and company and love. Cuddles. But you know, and even really lonely people do this. And I know about being alone. I used to play role-playing games as a child. Right? I know about having no friends. I used to play computer games a lot. But you hang out with other kids that do the same thing. You form your tribe. Do you still have goths? Is that still a thing? Do goths still exist? We used to have punks. We don't. Punks died out. I don't know where punks have gone. But goths, I think, are still a thing. And they find each other at school too. And academics and all kinds of tribes find each other. Human beings are intensely sociable, and we take our cues from other people. We very, very frequently look to see what everyone else is doing in order to decide what we should be doing ourselves. Have you ever had a fire alarm in your classroom? What do you do? Is that a real fire alarm? I don't know. Is it? I think it is. I'm not sure. Let's just wait. We'll just wait. We work out what we should be doing from what everyone else is doing, even though there's a fire alarm ringing. It's extraordinary. I once worked in I used to run restaurants as well. I've had quite a checkered past. And I remember in this restaurant, do you have TGI Fridays here? TGI Fridays, do you have this? I'm sorry, it's an American restaurant. The kitchen caught fire, as dramatically as it sounds, it really did. Whoosh. And the restaurant filled up with smoke, and of course smoke comes down. So the smoke was down to here. And I am ushering guests out because you must leave now, leave now. And there was another manager stopping them from leaving, saying, please pay your bill. Please pay your bill. I physically wrestled him aside and said, the building's on fire. Get these people out now. He was sacked for that. Social norms and things we're habitually, we habitually regress back to are terribly powerful. It's very hard for people to go against social norms. And we can use this in schools to help to create a culture. Like for example, if I were to show you that, this is that classic example. Maybe some of you have seen this before. If I were to show you that line, and then to show you these lines. Now hands up who thinks that the one that's most similar to that first line is number 2. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll give you another chance. So there's a line there. I'm going to show you 3 lines. Which one is closest in length to that line? Not closest physically. You see, language matters. It's closest in length. So hands up for 2. Are you sure? 3. And 1. Okay, let's try that again. 2, 3, or 1. Put your hand up if you changed your mind between those 2 goes. That's interesting. One person, I saw more people. Brave. Very brave of you, thank you. I'll tell you what's interesting. The answer is, it's 1. It is 1, right? Now, and I don't know what was going on in your minds then. Nobody said 2, God bless you, because it's not. Some people said 3, and that's a bit more reasonable because at least it's closer. It is closer. And also, I'm asking you a kind of a conference psychology question, haven't I? So some of you are probably thinking, and there's a trick to this. This is one of those questions where the 2 arrows are the same. It's not. It really is just which one's the same. Here's an interesting thing. They did an experiment where they had 100 people in a room or 50 people in a room, and 49 of them were employed by the psychologist. And one of them was somebody off the street. And they did the same thing again, but they paid all the 49 people to put their hand up for 2. And they found that time and time and time again, people repeatedly went with the group opinion. Even in the face of evidence in their eyes. Only 25% of people regarded the wrong answer all the time. Only 1 in 4 people were ballsy enough to go, no, this is wrong. Everyone else is wrong and I am right. Maybe all of you are like that. But it is very fun, it's interesting, or terrifying. The power of conformity. The conformity gets a bad rap, because obviously we fear that conformity will lead to other sins. Like, for example, falling in with antisocial habits, but also being cruel or mean. You don't even have to think as far as the spectre of fascism to know why conformity can be dangerous. But also conformity is very useful for human beings in a community because you know how to get along with one another. We can interact in a way that's predictable. And good school leaders, what they did was, they made sure, let me just fast forward it. This will be available online afterwards, okay? I can't do the singing thing again because I'm running out of time. But we found this good school leaders consciously created their cultures, were extraordinarily consistent about it, made sure all of the staff constantly repeated the same messages. It didn't mean they had to be robots. What it meant was that there were things which they wouldn't bend on at all. So if the rule was, I don't know, no mobile phones, then they meant it. It was the commitment to that. The authenticity, the integrity of the commitment to that expectation, which made the difference. There's no point some of your teachers doing it and some of your teachers not doing it. And if you're a teacher, there's no point doing it some of the time but not all of the time. If you've got a rule, no mobile phones, for an example, I don't care about, I do care about, then you've got to commit to that and carry it out. It's like having a bucket with one hole in it. You know, if the bucket's great, but it's got one hole, the water flows out. If you've got a wonderful fence, let's say Donald Trump gets his horrible wish, and gets to build his ridiculous wall, which is like the fantasy of a child. Let's say he gets that. There's no point if there's a mile missing, which there will be incidentally anyway. And the wall's not a wall then. People get through, water, and children will find the way through any system. If people can burrow out of camps and prisons, if Andy DeFries can burrow out of prison in Shawshank Redemption, then people can go anywhere. You know? So good leaders consciously created their culture. They were consistent in their culture. They had these steel poles which would never bend. And by doing so, they would create social norms towards which children should gravitate. And in the schools that were not effective, we found that the leaders very frequently reacted to misbehaviour. They waited for misbehaviour to happen and then just dealt with it. And frequently, they dealt with it by using far too few methods. It was either all punishment, all reward, or all restorative practices. And frequently, you've heard the saying, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Children are complex. We need consistency. They need sanctions at times. They need rewards. They need encouragement. They need nurturing, support, extra learning groups. They need 100 different things. And that complexity of response, which is a reactive approach, married to a proactive approach of consciously deciding that culture, we found was extraordinarily effective in creating cultures where children already knew what they should be doing before they misbehaved, which created a social norm towards which many gravitated. Now, did that fix the problems? Absolutely not, but at least it provided a cultural structure upon which their behaviour could be framed. And many children like to conform to structures in which they feel safe, valued, treated with dignity, and also treated as though they can achieve. Because one of the greatest ways we can value children and treat them with dignity is by saying to them, I know you can do better. Not, this is rubbish, do better, but I believe in you. I believe in your capacity to improve. And that simple language change, which means the same thing in many ways, is so wonderfully powerful, rather than saying you're rubbish. But to say this is a place where we care about you, but we care enough about you to have higher expectations, possibly even than you have of yourself, is terribly powerful. I see it time and time in schools, no matter how they implement that strategy. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe, is that clock right? Yes? Ah! It's 4 o'clock. Anyway, it's been a great day. Thank you so much. Wait. I really need to check this. I don't want to leave too early. Oh no, that is right, sorry. Can we just hide that, please? Guys, I've overrun, which for a host and a sponsor is a terrible thing to do. I don't have time for questions, but do grab me anytime throughout the day. It's been an honour to meet you. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. I'll play you out. Slides will be available on the website.